Hello and welcome to Court. I'm Sasha de Boyle, Director of the Court International Festival of Literature, and I'm so excited to be bringing you day 2 of our first ever digital festival. I hope you enjoyed this event, and if you do, please consider checking out our other events online at court.ie. All our events are broadcast live, but if you've missed out and would like to watch or listen again, you'll be able to find them all on our website afterwards, and also on our SoundCloud and YouTube channels. As you'll have noticed, this event is free, but if you'd like to make a donation to support Court, we'd be very grateful, and you can do so at court.ie/support us. In addition, after the event, we'll be sending out a post-event survey, and we would also be very grateful if you could fill this in. We can't be there with you, but we're so glad that you're here. Welcome to Court. Hi guys!
Hi Sasha.
Hi Sasha.
So I'm joined here by Liz McInerney and Elaine Feeney, excellent writers both, and they're going to be bringing us a conversation on craft, class, and characters. I'm going to start by introducing both of them, and then we're going to go straight into a reading from Elaine, and she'll tell us a bit about the book she's reading from as well. So first up, we have Liz McInerney. Liz is a novelist and writer from Gort in County Galway. Her work is featured in Winter Papers, Stinging Fly, Granta, and on BBC Radio 4, to name but a few. Her debut novel, The Glorious Heresies, was published in 2015 and won the 2016 Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction and the 2016 Desmond Elliott Prize. Her second novel, The Blood Miracles, was released in 2017 and won the 2018 Royal Society of Literature Encore Award. Lisa is also currently a contributing editor at The Stinging Fly. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And Elaine Feeney. Elaine is a poet and novelist based in Galway. She has published 3 collections of poetry: Where's Katie?, The Radio Was Gospel, and Rise, all out with salmon poetry. She teaches at the National University of Ireland, Galway, and St. Jarlath's College, and her work has been widely published in Poetry Review, The Stinging Fly, The Irish Times, Copper Nickel, and many more. Her debut novel, As You Were, is going to be released this August. Hi, Elaine.
Hey Sasha, how are you? Thanks for having us on.
Good. So Elaine's going to kick us off with a reading, but I have to make a content warning before we start, which is that the readings today contain swear words. So if you have small ears listening, I would perhaps send them out for the readings.
Thanks for that, Sasha. It's a bit built up now. So yeah, my novel was to be out last week actually, so it's been delayed until August, so As You Were. So I'm going to read a little piece from this now. The action is set in a hospital ward, and it is around the main protagonist, Sinead Hines, who is in her late 30s, and she has just found out very early on in the novel that she has and unfortunately a terminal diagnosis that she decides to keep secret. And she ends up on a ward with a motley crew of strangers. And the 2 women on the ward are Jane Lohan and Margaret Rose Sherlock. And I'm just going to read a little piece here where one of the men on the ward gets seriously ill very quickly. And Margaret Rose and Jane are searching for a cure to save Shane. So this is chapter 9. And the hospital draft in 2 young student nurses to look after him while he's dying. Chapter 9. After lunch, 2 young student nurses arrived, attempting to open a bottle of bright orange energy drink between them. The taller of the 2 women held the bottom, while the smaller twisted the top with her hand, curving her hips away in the opposite direction. They began taking turns supping from the bottle, and the smaller woman opened out a window for air. Legend night, but OMG, that taxi driver, creepy. The smaller one had an arc of mascara underneath one eye and some silver glitter on the back of her hand. Monday morning rounds were underway in the late afternoon, and the trainees had been drafted in to keep an eye on Shane. There was some concern. It wouldn't be long. No, they had no idea how long, and neither of these young nurses in training had ever watched anyone die. Oh God, they might die themselves. OMG, like, what the fuck? What if they faint? Poor man. It would be awful watching him die, they agreed, and they didn't feel they had adequate training for this. And instead of making them worried, this made them giggle. The energy drink came down the both nostrils of the smaller one with the black arc under her eye. They took to fits of discussing last night, checking Snapchat, and then standing ever so straight at times as though on sentry-like duty. Is he dead yet? Ease to him. Yeah, family called, but no sign of them. That's so sad. Lit. Lol. Soz. I'm just so giddy. But fuck me, how will we know when he's dead? His eyes are closed already. He's kind of cute, right? Yeah, he's lovely, isn't he? They decided he was lovely, and I agreed. Lovely, Shane. They gave him a bed bath to pass the time, make him more comfortable and maybe even blow dry his hair. And yes, they could use Margaret Rose's hairdryer. And no, don't wake her. Hearing is the last to go. Vigil at his bedside, hankies, phones, Club Orange, crisps, rosary beads, and apologies. Then one ran out frantically for juicy fruit and then for hula hoops and salted popcorn. His input now was nil. His output was nil. His peg feeds had stopped. Jane woke Margaret Rose and they searched deep in their nightstands, tugging out extra religious paraphernalia for a cure to save Shane. Margaret Rose was busy. This was the best way to be after Nikita's swift exit. Jane was busy as this was her only way. The search for a cure went in a hierarchy of inanimate but precious objects, with head nods, and everything was displayed on the shiny mattress of Jane's bed like an eccentric blue May altar. The two women hummed and hawed as they pawed over beads and cards and plastic statues of saints full up to their necks with water. If they could only get in the mitten of Padre Pio, or a drop of blessed oil of St. Therese of Lisieux, or even a lock of St. Francis of Assisi's hair, or even a hair from one of his pets, but they were unsure that Assisi had left behind a cure at all. Margaret Rose put Michaela on the Nokia to someone in Navan who had the mitten of Padre Pio. She'd been given it for her son who had itchy and incurable warts, and it would be sent down on the next bus with a trusted bus driver and hopefully make it on time for Shane. Jane blessed herself backwards, which, according to Margaret Rose, was motioning in the devil, and Jane stared at her blankly, then began blessing Margaret Rose instead, misunderstanding the instructions. So we all blessed ourselves 10 times at Margaret Rose's request, for fear we'd bring the work of the devil onto the ward. Michaela, her daughter, instructed that we do it like the soccer players, and she demonstrated to her mother and Jane. They copied her, blessed themselves, kissed their thumbs, lifted their kissed hands high to the ceiling, thumbs clutched, and finally walloping their hearts. With the help of good God and of all his many archangels, especially the favourite one, Michael, or so they thought. Although they were unsure as to which archangel was the favourite, the glove would get her, for Shane, safely off the Navan bus.
That was brilliant, thank you. I had to mute my microphone because I was laughing.
Okay.
I think it was a beautiful event. It was brilliant. Elaine, I wanted to ask, I know you mentioned your book was due to be released last week and it's been pushed back, which of course must be frustrating at this time. But you've actually been writing for a really long time. You have 3 collections of poetry out, but you're being billed as a debut author. What does it feel like to be a debut author again?
It's actually really nice. It seems kind of exciting, and the fiction writers have been lovely to me so far. So yeah, it's unusual in that way that exactly I've gone through the publication process, since I was quite young. So it's definitely a different feeling. There seems to be a bit more excitement, and I think maybe support. Weirdly, I suppose, there just seems to be more excitement around the novel for some reason, which is both wonderful and also equally terrifying, because I could kind of just shove these poetry books into the world and lots of people didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, the response has been wonderful. It's funny, to me, the book's been out for ages because I've just heard so much about it and I've heard several readings. So I can't wait till audiences can get their hands on it. And we were just speaking before the event that the book is actually available for pre-order, is it not?
Yeah, you can pre-order the book at your favourite indie bookstore. So that would be wonderful. So you can, yeah, it's available for pre-order.
Whereas Lisa, you are working on your third book, and I wondered, it's part of a sort of a loose trilogy-ish. How does it feel to return to the same cast of characters again and again?
Well, it's fantastic for me. I love these characters, so being able to come back to them and seeing what they're up to and kind of throwing new challenges their way, and seeing what happens. That's it's a great joy to me as well. And I felt like with the third book, I very much wanted to find a kind of an arc and an ending for each of these people, because in a way, I mean, the first book, The Glorious Heresies, came out in 2015, but these characters have been in my head for a lot longer than that. So it kind of feels like I'm bringing them to the end of a road, and also that I won't be able to hang out with them ever again, which is a bit upsetting. And people keep saying to me, well, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, oh no, I have to do other things. Oh God, this is very upsetting. So yeah, the mixed feelings, Sasha, mixed feelings.
That's interesting. Both of you write such strong and vivid characters, and I wondered if you could speak a bit about that, Lisa, maybe to start us off. Like, what makes a good character for you, one that has managed to stick in your head for that long?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because uh, I guess I always say writers are a little bit like a magpie in that. Oh, well, that's a callback there to Elaine's book, As You Were. So there is a magpie very heavily featured in As You Were, which is available for pre-order right now from all indie bookshops. Um, well, writers are like magpies in that when you're creating a character, I think you find something about a particular person that interests you, and it starts forming into a character of its own, maybe somewhere in the back of your head. And then as you move through the world, maybe you see a quirk that somebody else has, or a response to a challenge or an upset or an argument that somebody shows in front of you, and you go, oh, that's good. I like that. Maybe that would work for so and so. So I find that characters for me, they tend to come together over quite a long period of time. It might be one of the reasons that I find short stories so difficult to get my head around when I'm writing them, is because I haven't spent that long with the characters, and it's a completely different challenge. But for novels, they just tend to stay in my head for a very long time. And the longer they are and the more fully formed they become, the more you want to see what's going to happen if you make them do this, or if you put them up against this person, or if you give them this particular terrible thing that's happened, or this particular hilarious thing that happens. You want to see how they react. And the more time you spend with them figuring out what those reactions are, the more fully formed they become. So it's quite interesting. It's a bit obsessive. It's probably a little bit mad. I don't know.
Elaine, how does that chime with you?
Yeah, I agree completely. It becomes quite obsessive. And I think I started to write this book in the first person of, I didn't really know whose voice was coming forward when I started to write it. I remember writing out 12 chapters. It was after a very long, protracted time of illness for me. And the poems just weren't representing what I was trying to say. I didn't know at that time what I was trying to say, but these motley crew of characters definitely came forward. And I agree with Lisa that it is an intrusion, actually. And I remember listening to fiction writers say things like, I couldn't do that with that character because that's not how they'd behave. And, I found that kind of absurd. And I was like, just make them do it. And now I realize, yes, they can be very bold and frustrating, and they really have their own personality. And I even found that in the editing process of it as well, that I very much was like, no, that is wrong. My editor, Kate, was fantastic. And we chat about the characters as if they're alive. And I know Lisa is get away from Ryan and Maureen and so on. But she's never going to. I'm sorry, Lisa. They're going to be with you forever, because I find myself asking, this matriarch character, Margaret Rose, in my novel, I find myself asking her for advice. So yeah, the characters very much come to life, and, you can get frustrated with them. And at one stage, the main character in my novel, Sinead, and her husband, and you just want them to talk to each other, and and they kind of move around it so often, and you get so frustrated. And there's a point in the novel where her husband Alex does actually sort of shout, and I was just so relieved, but it really is, it's a very unusual dynamic, but it beats dealing with real people.
The Edinburgh International Book Festival did a very interesting project a couple of years ago about the idea of hearing voices. And they spoke to all the authors appearing at the festival that year, because apparently a large proportion of people with no, mental health conditions do hear voices on a daily basis. And so they asked authors whether or not they hear the voices of their characters in their heads. And that was quite interesting. I wondered, do you hear their voices? Elaine, do you want to start us off?
Well, I think I was quite isolated growing up. I had my siblings. We lived in the countryside. I'm very close to them, and I'm very fond of them. But yeah, I heard voices from a very young age. That's a very big disclosure for Court. But I definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, and I created fictional characters, and I'm very embarrassed, I suppose. I played with imaginary people growing up, was either that or the cows and sheep. So, of course, I do. I hear, and sometimes I have to turn the radio on to stop the interruption of their voices. But I mean, I hear characters from other novels as well. I could just as easily hear, you had Alan McMonigal on last night, Laura Cassidy walking down the street in Galway, Mike McCormick's characters, Lisa's. I'll hear characters from other novels. They don't end. I always think that a novel or a book is just a slice into life, it's similar to like Shakespearean dramas. You start, you end, and there was there was life before the beginning of this play, and there's going to be life after it. But this is just a slice. But the characters don't die for readers ever. You bring them with you always,
True. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the way people speak is really important anyway. I think people's accents and maybe the way they put words together, or what they're trying to get across, and whether they have a phone voice, all of these things. These are all really important anyway for characters. So I don't think it's any surprise that if you read a good character on the page, or if you're trying to write a character, that you want to hear how they will sound. And it very much is the case for me. I was brought up in Galway, but I spent a lot of time in Cork. And when the characters started making their way from my head onto the page, they started speaking to me in Cork accents, which was not surprising at all. But it kind of added a something to them. It just brought them to life in a way that they hadn't really been when they were kind of coming together. The way they spoke was just that important. My thing as well, when I'm writing, I need to hear how a piece of writing sounds. Now, a lot of writers do this, and actually any writer who is learning to write or finding their voice, they should be doing this anyway. You should be reading aloud what you've written. That's to find rhythm, to find any kind of areas where it might sag, whatever it might be. But it's not just that for me. I also need to hear the dialogue. So I will say it for the characters, I will talk it out, and I will respond. And I sound a little bit crazy when that happens. And I'm just really happy that the place that I write, which is where I am right now, is on the first floor of my house. So nobody can actually see me doing it, because it's a bit mad.
That's a really lovely point about characters and place that you make, because actually I was going to draw on that, is that both of you write very distinctly from a place, be that Galway or Cork in the books that you've put out so far. And you write the accents really, really well. Like, you can tell that the people in Heresies are speaking in a Cork accent, and you can tell that the people in As You Were are speaking in Hiberno English. But I actually, because I'm from Cork, I was like, why is this not? I wasn't sitting into it right. It took a while for me to get the rhythm of it, and it's because it was a Galway accent. And I wondered how much work goes into shaping that accent as it sits on the page. Elaine, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, that was a real big challenge. I didn't want to write without trying to put some peppering of phonetical sounds on the language of the people that I was trying to represent. And it really was a challenge, because firstly I needed an editor that was going to go there and allow me my space with this. There's Galway characters, they're from different regions in Galway. There's also a Polish character, there's an Australian character, and so on. And you have to be really, I was really, really careful and tried really hard for it not to fall into caricature. I really wanted to represent these people, some of them that I had grown up with all my life, these matriarchal characters, but without caricaturing them. And I really went to hell and back with that. I remember getting up one night in the middle of the night, and I had a whole desk full of the phonetics of 3 different members of the same family. So a mother and her 2 daughters. And one of the daughters spoke slightly different to the other daughter. And like, I hope you picked up on that, Sasha, when you read the novel. I'm only joking. But no, not at all. But I had to go back, and I had to really, you know, yeah, I studied it for a while, but also I grew up with this voice, and to actually put letters on it and to spell it out, it is quite a challenge, you know. But just come back to Lisa. Not only does Lisa write in this, you read very strongly with your Cork accent too, Lisa. It's lovely.
Yeah, I can't seem to help that at all. It just comes out. It also comes out when I get very upset about things. It comes really, when I get like really angry, I get angry in Cork. It's a bit strange, actually.
No, yeah, no, it's great because I spent some time in Cork, and actually I only spent about 1.5 years, and I get angry in Cork too, so maybe there's just something in that.
Lisa, what was the process like of getting the accent across on the page for you? Was it a matter of phonetics? Was it, you know, syntax? What did you go for?
I think Elaine has hit on something there. It's something you have to be very careful of, is that you don't want to stray into caricature, because that immediately means that you've created your character to be something that is ludicrous and something that a reader may not feel any connection with because they're a figure of fun. So you don't want to do that. And I'm very weird about speech that's written phonetically on the page. Like, it has to be done, I think, very delicately. In general, I think there's more to accent than just maybe putting in the odd apostrophe or spelling something a little bit wrong. You can kind of read it in the rhythm of the speech, and the words that they use, the slang that they use, maybe the way that they form the sentence and stuff like that. You can kind of, you know, it comes across anyway. And I think that it's just integral to a character. It's not something you can afford to get wrong. A great character from any work of fiction, from any book, you can't just take one out of one book and put them somewhere else and expect them to work. You can't just take a Kevin Barry, for example, a Kevin Barry character, and just put it in New York and expect that character to make sense. It's not. It's going to be incongruous. And there's a reason for that. It's because vernacular is important. It's because speech is important. Locality is important. All of these things. So, yes.
It's interesting. You touched on caricature and someone being a subject of fun, and I think that's something that neither of you ever slip into, is caricature. However, though you touch on quite dark subjects, they're still incredibly funny books, as we saw from Elaine's reading at the start to kick us off. And I wondered, how do you strike that balance? Like, how do you approach writing humor? How are you so funny? Lisa, do you want to start us off?
I think it's an Irish thing in general. I mean, we are. Oh no, I'm going to correct myself, because I find myself saying that, and it's as if that other countries around the world don't also employ black humor, and of course they absolutely do. I think it's a very human thing to see something horrific or upsetting or challenging and to want to poke fun at it, and it is something we very much do here, and it's something that's kind of built into the way Irish people speak as well. The joke is, of course, and well, it's not really a joke because I do it myself. The joke is that in Ireland, you're never really part of a conversation. You're just waiting for the other person to stop talking because you have something great to say as well. And you're going to make them laugh. And you're not going to, you're not going to kind of take what they're saying seriously at all. It's just an opportunity for you to show how witty you are. So that's built into the way we deal with things here. And I think when you start writing in the vernacular, you start using Hiberno English, which is such a lively language anyway, then it's impossible to be po-faced and humorless. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, this is what we're like. This is the spirit of Ireland, and that's the most lofty thing I'm going to say as part of this session today.
Elaine, do you agree?
Yeah, Lisa is incredibly funny because, in her writing and in her person. But I think there's a defense mechanism in humor. I think for me personally, growing up, think, you know, Edna O'Brien says about her upbringing that terror and beauty were very closely aligned, and I feel quite similar, you know, and maybe that might be the experience of many people's childhood, you know, beauty and terror, you know, they can be very close experiences for people. And I think for survival, perhaps, I don't know, I may have developed a very black sense of humor very early. I don't know. I find really, really awful, absurd things quite funny. And when I was in hospital, it was absolutely hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. It was some of the funniest times of my life. Like, seriously, I got so many gifts of people I'd never met, and medals, honestly, prayer books, lots and lots of blessings, cures, crackers, rice cakes, you name it, I got them as gifts, and they were being really genuine and earnest. And I just find listening to people's conversations can be just absolutely hilarious. And I know that's probably, I don't mean that in any mean way, I mean that in an affectionate way. I don't know, Sasha, since you moved to Galway, I think Galway people are quite funny. I think, well, Cork people are too, obviously, Lisa, but I think there is something about you don't have a conversation, you listen, they're quite witty. I mean, I'm sure there's some big lofty academic research into like the likes of the play The Shock Run and all this, where there was obviously some sort of agitation in the language, or some, you know, there's probably something post-colonial about the fact that we can be really funny and no one knows what we're talking about. And I mean, I think humor can be national, but then it can be tiny, it can be microcosmic, it can actually be just within your family. I know with my siblings and I've mentioned them already, when we're funny, no one knows what the joke is. You know, and we think we're hilarious, and we're like literally rolling around laughing with tears coming out of our eyes, and everyone's just really startled. My husband said it was one of the hardest things when he got to know my family first, was what was going on.
That's totally spot on. It's the same with me and my siblings as well. I wanted to take a minute to talk about the role of women in both of your work. I think both of you have shaped really, really brilliant older female characters in both of your books. And also there's a through line through all of your work, through Rise, through As You Were, and through your novels, Lisa, of the impact that Irish politics has had on women specifically throughout history. And I wondered, do you feel like that's still relevant today? I mean, we've come through repealing the Eighth, and you know we're on the other side of that. So, you know, potentially we could say everything's fine now. What do you think about that? Elaine, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think we've seen massive changes in the last decade. I suppose since I first started to write poetry, which was angsty and political and had an agenda, which I suppose maybe I've lost that fire. It's up to maybe another generation to pick that up. But I see, yeah, we've come a long way with legislation and so on, but there's still massive cracks in our society, particularly structurally. You know, a structural disadvantage is still there. And I mean, we're living through extraordinary times, extraordinarily traumatic times. And I'm already hearing about austerity on the radio and in the news and so on. I'm already hearing these mumblings already. And I understand, obviously, it's a catastrophic global crisis and so on. But you can't have literature with a capital L without literacy. You know, you can't have books without the structures in place for young people. I mean, I was very lucky with a free education system and a free university place. And that wouldn't have been the experience of my mother, and that wasn't, or my grandmother, or either of my grandmothers, or their mothers. We were doing a family tree recently with one of my sons, and we had to ring up asking the questions on the maternal lines, because of course their names were wiped out of history, and that's just a whole other thing. But I deal with the legacy and trauma of the past, and I think that the women that I've experienced in my life, and I spoke about this before, collective care of society is one of the greatest things we have as not a gift, as being in a society. We have to have collective care. And when I wrote the novel, I was acutely aware that I wanted it to be a community novel, and I wanted it to reflect these wonderful women that had given me what I have today, because they did, and they did it on a lot of hard work and a lot of children and a lot of sadness and a lot of trauma and a lot of humour and good spirits, never getting out of the country. The women, like, I mean, I work on the Two Mother and Baby Home as just an area that we could talk about very briefly, and it comes up in the novel. And even just, the schemes to remember these women and their children. The redress schemes and so on, they're up against it constantly. We're still up against it. Yes, there have been huge strides forward. Yes, there have been huge waves made, but we have still a long way to go, because culturally, I think you can change legislation, you can change the country from the top down, but culturally we need to change as well, But I'm very into education, obviously, as a teacher and so on. And I think, as I said, we can't have literature without literacy. Yeah, I don't know. Did I go way off the point? Sorry.
Not at all. Lisa?
I think the other thing is, if we start thinking of women as some sort of big homogenous group, we can very quickly start congratulating ourselves for all of these wonderful strides that we've made. We do it, like, if we just talk about literature, we do it now. We're like going, well, aren't the young women writers doing really well? And it's like, yeah, they are, some of them, we're going to do this like all across society. We're going to kind of say, well, isn't it great that, this girl with her fabulous education, with her great experience, has gone into this job and she's earning the same as the fella beside her? Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, okay, that is wonderful. That is great. But that doesn't, what about the refugee woman? What about the traveller woman? What about the working class woman? What about a woman with disabilities? What about queer women? All these things. So the idea that women is that we're going to congratulate ourselves for all these fabulous things that we've done that have benefited, a certain section of society that was already quite ahead in terms of privilege. The other thing is, like, that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, as the saying goes. So the idea that we would just kind of go, well, that's done now, we can forget it all and never worry again that these rights will be eroded or taken away from us, as they are doing right now in other parts of the world. It's not even a thing that we can entertain, that we can think that we're done. And this isn't just about women either. This is about all groups in society, marginalised and privileged, and what are the rights that people should have, and what do we need to keep doing in order to make sure that we have an equal and fair society. The other side of it is, when you're talking about characters, if we want to write books in which the characters are just enjoying the spoils of, all of the strides that we've made, what, do they not have histories? Do they not have backstories? Of course they do. That's great if you're going to populate an entire book with Gen Zs, but you're not. And so for me, Maureen, of course, Maureen Phelan, for me, like, at this particular point, I think she's 68 in the third book. I can't just kind of go, well, Maureen was watching Billie Eilish videos on YouTube and going, God, isn't it great to be a woman? You know what I mean? Doesn't work.
Yeah, I very much agree. Sorry, I very much agree with what you're saying, Lisa. And I was interested in intergenerational characters, because you can't just characters just don't come out of nowhere, and we don't have a society with this idea of individualism that has really, really been strong in the last 10, 20, 30 years. You got this, you go do that, just do it. All this kind of thing that you are at the center of your own world. It's quite a corrupt way of thinking, in my opinion. Find yourself in hospital tomorrow and you'll quickly realize that your individual intellect isn't really worth a whole lot, So that was very important to me, that we do rely on other people, and that the communities have to exist where you can have your own individual flair, or whatever it is. You can have that, but that you have to, be part of a community and be part of society also. And I agree with Lisa very much so, what she said about women from working class backgrounds, and women currently, and men and children in direct provision centres. We just seem to find other ways to oppress other people all the time, and history is so cyclical, and it keeps repeating itself, unfortunately, and we're doomed, sadly. In lots of ways. We are repeating it though, and anyway, sorry.
And actually, this feels, though, we're living through very difficult times and a lot of people are going through a lot, this feels like a moment to take a pause and actually go, well, what have we learned and what do we need to keep learning? Like, what can we come out of this? We had a discussion earlier with Sinead Gleason and Sarah Baum, and they spoke a lot about that, about how this is kind of a moment to stop and take stock and reflect on kind of what this individualism and this, highly productive capitalist lifestyle that we've all been living, what the impact has been for us and for people across society, and what we can do to make it better.
The only thing is the lessons from things like that kind of pause, the lessons take a long time to learn, or to even kind of get the context right in your head for it to even settle. So the idea that if we just take a week and have a think, I mean, it's not going to be that simple either. But certainly it's the individualistic society, or I know that's an oxymoron, but like the idea of just do it, you go girl, lean in, all of these kind of things. You can do whatever you set your mind to, without like completely ignoring that the systems that we're all bound to work under, and the systems that can fail. I mean, obviously that's no way forward. And I think maybe we're starting to kind of see the problem with that kind of thinking now, because it's all very well and good to kind of be an individual or to be a single country and not want to interact with other countries or with other people, with other societies. We're all human. I know this is so trite, but we are all in this together. And that's not something that I'm saying as a kind of a nice little platitude. It's a reality. We are all in this together.
I feel like...
Yeah. Sorry, Sasha, go on.
We started talking about books, and we've now gotten onto some fairly serious world-fixing issues. Like we're going to come out of this with a solid plan for dismantling the structural inequality at play in Ireland. Elaine, did you have further thoughts on this?
Well, just what Lisa was saying there about just in this current crisis we're in, I think it's very important to remember that, I've been in lockdown now for 45 days, and lockdown, isolation, quarantine, cocooning, whatever word suits the palate. But people have been in these isolated environments for years. People have been ill and have been stuck inside. And I think there's a collective now shared understanding for people of what that experience might be like, even just a snapshot into it. Even just this festival being digital. I know somebody that I know very well who has a disability who is so thrilled that this festival is online. And I think that might change the discourse, that we could maybe have festivals and have readings and so on, and also Zoom simultaneously, because I think we were all busy. So when you're very busy, you are very focused on yourself and your family, and that's okay. That's important. But I grew up where, my granny would have given her neighbour her last tea bag or her last bowl of sugar, and those kind of communities where they really helped each other out. And with regards to this crisis as well, you hear a lot of they beat the illness, or they're a survivor, or they'll battle this. And when I wrote As You Were, I was very conscious of that Sinead had been given a terminal diagnosis, and that if she did tell people, that the onus is then on her to beat this, or that if she doesn't, in a way that makes her less of a person. And she already has this kind of catastrophic memory from a very abusive father growing up, and she already knows that she feels intrinsically that she's not good enough to beat something, I think. And I don't like that language. I think we need to change that language around people and illness and hospital and isolation and disability, and as Lisa said, we are all in this together. We've all made a hames of the world together, we and some people way worse than others and so on. But yeah, I'll stop.
I really no, it's brilliant. I really want to keep talking about this, but I'm mindful that Lisa actually hasn't read at all yet, and I would love to hear some of your work, Lisa, if you're of a mind to share.
I might read for you a little bit of the third book, which I'm still editing. However, I'm pretty sure this bit isn't going to change. I hope so. This is not available for pre-order anywhere. It's on A4 sheets, but obviously I'm not very used to reading this, so please be gentle. The third novel is called, by the way, The Rules of Revelation. So yeah. Okay, I'll just crack into it because it's from near the beginning. It was said that Ireland was reinventing herself, as if this was some rare event, and the country wasn't in a constant state of dithering. Post-colonial, post-Catholic, post-Tiger, post-Brexit, junctures tracked by little owl invigilators peering out windows with net curtains bunched in their fists, and every new collapse portending a new wave of notions. It was said that Ireland always knew what she was, even if she didn't stick with it for long. But how could she? What was she at, legalising same-sex marriage and revolting over women's healthcare and céad míle fáilte and fuck off back to where you came from and divide et impera and bishops on the school board and wanting everything and claiming to have fuck all? It was 2019 and a funny time to be Irish. At no time in Ireland's history was it not a funny time to be Irish. A little-owled invigilator now sat at a wooden counter in a third-floor apartment in Cork city centre. She was not altogether welcome here, but she was altogether comfortable. She was comfortable in most settings because a couple of decades before she had decided she might as well be. She was little by anyone's standards. She was 5'3" and comprised mostly of cardigans. She was owled by her own insistence. She was 68 and held no truck with the idea that antiquity was delayed by good diet and modern medicine, because youth meant contributing and conforming. Youth was a pain in the arse, and therefore youth would not be conferred on her at her age. Her name was Maureen Phelan, or Mo Looney on occasion. She was in great nick, and she wasn't keen on anyone knowing it. The apartment belonged to her only son, who'd been put in her by Dominic Looney, a man she hadn't seen since the middle of July 1969. She'd named the child James. He had gone with Jimmy. He would be 50 in less than a year. For a while, it hadn't looked like he would make the milestone. His eyebrows and eyelashes had come back, thank Jesus, but he'd gone awful skinny and shook. He put a cup of tea in front of her and turned to finish making his own. He looked as if he'd just gotten out of bed, bags under his eyes, slightly slack-jawed, shuffling, though surely he was up hours. 5 of them, she told him, 4 fellas and a girl. Now it wouldn't be my kind of music, but he has a lovely voice, Jimmy. Her son sourly said, plenty times I heard that little fucker singing, plenty different tunes and not one of them stirring. Oh, don't be such an old goat. The lad has a gift. Will you let him make use of it? But that's it, girl. I don't remember him asking me. I wonder sometimes if it isn't half cracked that carry-on makes you. Make a fool of the law often enough and you start thinking you must be the law. Jimmy turned and leant back against his kitchen worktop. He folded his arms and held his mug on the opposite forearm and said, will you put a cork in it? I will not, she said. I don't remember him asking me. Grandeur, that is. You think you can survive anything now? That's what's wrong with you. Did you come over here to tell me Ryan Cusack wants to be a fucking troubadour? I came over to see you, she said, earnestly. Thank you.
That was amazing. I can't believe we got to hear from the third book.
Thank you.
That's so nice. So, Elaine, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing with the Irish Writers Centre's Young Delegates for Court this year, because they've actually sent in a couple of questions that I'm going to pose to both of you. So that would be a great preface for us.
Oh, firstly, I just want to say hi to them, to Tegan, Martin, Neve and Andrew, because they've kept me company this week. We've had some great workshops. I think, though, you get to that stage in life where you might be learning more of them than they are of me. So we workshopped this week. They're fantastic writers, different genres, children's writing and poetry, and then to prose writers. But we had a lovely Zoom chat and we got to know each other, and it was really, really nice, actually. And they've been reviewing the festival, and that we were online yesterday, and they were discussing that they love the poetry and they enjoyed Alan's and Mary's reading very much, and then Emer's. So yeah, it's been fantastic. It was great that we could do it virtually, because I thought with all that's going on, I wouldn't get to meet them or anything. So it's been quite lovely.
Yeah.
But I have to hear their questions first.
They're good questions. So we've been working with the Irish Writers Centre for several years now, and every year we select several young writers who are able to attend the festival, who might not otherwise be able to do so, and they receive mentoring. As Elaine just went into detail, this year she is the mentor, and they have been attending our events online along with all of our other audiences. So thanks to them for doing reviews, and I'll get to their questions now. So from Neil, we have a question for both of you, which is, what is your writing process in the current climate? And what do you find to be the most difficult part of your artistic process? Elaine, do you want to kick us off?
Would it be inappropriate if I just held up a bottle of wine? There is no writing process. It's been so difficult. I mean, I obviously came through this slam poetry tradition many moons ago, where we reacted instantly to political crisis, to things that were happening. Maybe very much like journalism, poetry, very fast. We were doing it weekly. And I'm not entirely sure that it was the best way to approach writing. I can't write anything. I have been keeping a daily tweet diary, all right, which is just a bit tongue-in-cheek. But I can't write anything substantial at the moment because I was in the middle of novel 2. So that's kind of gone quiet. I am trying to read. Look, we are living through a pandemic. It's really, really difficult to be industrious. And I think we need to just give ourselves a little bit of space. We're going to need time to process this, and just do your best. If you can write, wonderful. If you can read, wonderful. Pre-order books and so on. But my process right now is a bit messy. And the kids are here. My husband is working from home. It's all going on.
Lisa?
I have deadlines, which is a thing I've been saying for the last 3 years now, and tragically it's the same deadlines. I just keep missing them. So I have all of this work that I am forced to keep doing. It's really hard. It's like do you know what's hard? It's hard to kind of lose yourself in the process of writing. So for me, like the third novel, I'm editing it and I'm changing a few things around, and it's particularly hard to kind of lose myself in the world that the characters are existing in, because the book is set in 2019. They have no idea what's coming for them down the line. They're just living in ignorant bliss, and I hate them all. No, so it's very hard to get your head into that. It's very hard to get into that space, and then the other work I'm doing, it just feels bitty even when it's not. So I really probably could do with a week of doing nothing and just having a think, and just figuring out, because I think it would be a mistake for any writer, young, old, emerging, established, whatever, to try and make sense of what's happening in their work now. Obviously, I mean, I'm talking about prose writers, fiction writers, before Elaine goes, well, the slam poets now. But you need, I think, a little bit of distance from any kind of big event, and this is a huge event, to kind of correctly process it and figure out what it all means. So I think possibly keeping a diary would be one of the most honest ways to do about to kind of get this into work, prose, fiction, whatever it might be. But certainly I wouldn't expect to be drawing any amazing artistic conclusions. But I'm sure there are probably writers out there now tapping away diligently, going, I'm going to have the first COVID-19 novel if it kills me. Like the novel, not the COVID. Oh God, that's a dark joke now. Sorry. Apologies.
Right, another question. So from Tegan, do you feel that any of your characters closely resemble yourself or people in your life? And if so, was this a conscious decision to base these characters on somebody, or was it unconscious? Lisa, do you want to start?
This is easy for me because no, none of them. There is none of them that are like me or like anybody I know. I have to say that because there's a bunch of them that are criminals and drug dealers. So naturally, of course, none of them are like anybody I know. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I've never even heard of drugs. I just learned it off the internet. No, seriously, they're not. I think I get into terrible trouble because I have like my aunts and stuff will on occasion say things to me like, is it about us? Is the novel about us? Is that about us? And you're like, no, it's not about you at all. Will you please leave me alone? I mean, it has nothing to do with it. I find that if you start writing too close to yourself or too close to people that you know, you start getting very hampered by what you feel you can say. by what you feel. Maybe you have a bit of loyalty towards that person, maybe you feel uncomfortable. I think it's a big mistake to potentially borrow too much from other people. Now, it's completely different to take it from yourself, your own life, your own experiences, and certainly people who write autofiction are sometimes have the most amazing stuff comes out of that process. So I'm not saying that you can't go too close to yourself. I just think that for me, I would not be able to write anything very honest or sincere if it was based on anybody I knew, including myself.
Elaine?
I'm not going to answer that question now after that, Lisa. It's very easy. I can just say absolutely not, no, and tell a lie. Yeah, there are characters that would, I think very much Sinead's character started out some sort of hybrid of my experience in hospital. And then what happened with her was she made this choice that I would never make in my life. Because she hides this diagnosis of illness. I mean, I wouldn't keep it for 30 minutes. I mean, I ask Lisa, she knows me as a friend, I'd be on the phone to everybody, and I know that. And I just think that it was a remarkably brave and utterly selfless thing of her to do, to hide this so as she didn't upset her entire family unit. But it's way more complex than that. People think it's a really incredibly selfish thing that she did, but so yeah, it definitely started out. But when she made this different decision, then she just became Sinead, which was wonderful. I was, and the other characters, they're way too giving and wonderful to be closely aligned to me. Margaret Rose, maybe I'm a little bit Jane Lohan, maybe a little bit crazy, yeah. Maybe a little bit of Jane. So yeah, there's, of course, I mean, all of my characters, I have to be, like I wrote them, they have to be some sort of mad concoction of all the voices in my head. But I'm going to leave that there now before I sound any more crazy.
Brilliant. So from Martin, we have the question for both of you again. And so he's asked, did you ever struggle with having the confidence to put your work out there? And if so, was overcoming it a eureka moment or more of a gradual thing? Do you have any advice about this?
I would say.
Well, I'm going to. Oh, sorry, Lisa. Oh, go ahead, okay, Lisa. Go ahead.
Okay. I would say it's important not to overthink it. And I say this, for me, I didn't really have that much of an issue because I came up very, very slowly. I used to write a blog for years. And of course, you start writing a blog, you have an audience of 3, and then maybe you have an audience of 30, and then blah, blah, blah. So it kind of grows. And from that kind of beginning, for me, it was just a case of getting more and more used to different people reading your stuff until it becomes quite normal. The reason I say not to overthink it is because I think that the amount of barriers that are in place, that we believe are in place for writers of any real kind of, any kind of fiction, prose, poetry, whatever, sometimes those barriers are very much strengthened by what we are believing in our heads to be true. Like, I would have thought, if I was writing these books now, if I hadn't been published until now, I would just have read so much about working class writers and how they're not being given a fair shake that I would very much be afraid to put it out there. I think that fiction, I can only speak for fiction. I think that world is a lot more open and a lot more interested in new stories than emerging writers often believe. So I don't know a single editor that isn't mad to read something completely new and different and from a type of writer that he's never read before. I don't think that happens. So I think that a lot of it can be strengthened by your own fears. And that's why I say don't overthink it. I mean, confidence, none of us have it. We're all playing it by ear. We're all kind of faking it till we make it, I think. The most people, I don't really know anybody who like sends off a piece of new writing and goes, God, I can't wait to hear what people think of this. You know what I mean? You always exist in a state of insecurity and fear. You just have to pretend you're not and convince yourself you're not.
Elaine, you can go now.
Thank you. Well, yeah, just what Lisa said, and I know Martin because of the workshops, and Martin is predominantly a poet, so I think that that's a different thing, and I think that goes back to the eye of the poet and the eye of poetry and the life of the poet being so closely aligned to the poetry. Whether we want to believe it or not, that is the case. I mean, you can't pick up a poetry book on Sylvia Plath. There's two about her life, and that goes for many poets. So I think that's a different thing, and I think you can very quickly, like, nobody wants a poet in the family, you know, that quotation. So I think you have to believe in yourself, and I think get good guidance, maybe from mentorship, from a class or something, because. Or send your work to places that you trust the editors, I think is also useful, because sometimes, publishing stuff online that comes very quickly when you're young, there can be drawbacks to that because it's forever online then, and poetry for me as a young person, now Martin, they're all very well established, the four writers and the delegates. But when I was young, from 13 to 18, I mean, I wrote some woeful, awful stuff that if Facebook and social media was around, oh Lord, God help us. So with fiction, I mean, I went to fiction writing to escape the eye of poetry, the fact that this was all about me, to try to say things that I wanted to say that I could mask in fiction.
That's really interesting, especially because, Lisa, your blog is no longer online. Is that true?
I deleted that years ago, and it makes me laugh because every so often somebody will say to me, "I love your blog." I'm like, "Oh, really? You do you?" It's been scrubbed for the last decade, but okay. And it's for the reason that Elaine has just pointed out, is because I wrote the blog in my early 20s, and I was living on a council estate with my very, very small child, and I was not kind of, I didn't come from the background where somebody does a creative writing degree and goes on to do a master's and has a fabulous reading list and has a writing group around them kind of helping them kind of shape what they're doing, or their talent or their voice, all of that. I had to figure it out as I went along. So as you can imagine, like, those bits that I published online were shocking in comparison to the stuff that I am more than capable of producing these days.
What you're saying, Lisa, is you're mortified, Lisa. That's what you're saying.
I'm Scarlet.
We have one more question, but we're almost out of time, so you're going to have to be brief. So this is from Andrew, and his question for both of you would be about how to manage working between different forms, be that between fiction and poetry or between short stories and novels, and what are the different challenges that these forms present. So, just a really small question to finish this up. Lisa, would you like to start?
I like the way we kind of wait on the starting line there. I think there are very, very different ways of going about producing things in different forms and formats. So I think for me, the most important thing is not to be doing them at the same time. I think that if I've got my novelist brain is working, I should be writing a novel. I can't. Now, some people are brilliant at this. I mean, Roddy Doyle is fantastic at it. He will write a novel he'll start writing a novel in the morning and then he'll be writing a play in the afternoon. I mean, that's brilliant. I don't have that kind of brain. I have to concentrate on the particular form that I'm working with at that moment, and realize that they do different things and they need different things from me. So that's my brief response. I hope that's enough on what I would do.
Absolutely. Elaine?
Thanks for the question, Andrew. And I will check in on a serious note during the week. But I suppose it really comes down to how much money do you want? and then you have to decide what genre to pick. Okay, and I mean, no, I'm only joking. I'm only joking, kind of. I think for me, a more serious answer, poetry is quicker for me personally. I find fiction is tough, and it's more about sitting there and just bringing yourself to work every day. And like Lisa, this is where I work. I sit here and I just word after word. The poems come along, they come along in spurts, and they come along in, especially when I travel. And when I travel, I just keep a little journal, and I have loads of little journals, and they're all different for different things. And I just jot down a few things overheard, places I've been, the aesthetic, and so on. And I'll go back to those and I'll work them through, and I'll see is anything coming off them. And that's how the poems come for me. But like Lisa said, when you get a deadline, it's amazing how quickly you can work then, and how you can manage 10 genres in one day and hoover and make the dinner. So, it is about deadlines, and it's about how much do you want it, I suppose. And that's it. And Lisa made an excellent point. Editors are looking for new work, new voices, new writing. And same as Lisa, I didn't grow up in that going to do creative writing in college would be the most ridiculous thing ever. I mean, there were 5 job choices, and, they were all very specific. So, anyway, that's it. But I will check in with you this week, Andrew, and let you know more detail.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you for the most measured and quiet conversation I've ever had between the two of you. If you enjoyed the reading, that's okay. If you enjoyed hearing from Lisa and Elaine today, you can get their books on the Festival Bookshop, which is Charlie Byrne's have a website, so you can go to charliebyrne.ie /court and buy both their books, and you can pre-order Elaine's novel, which is forthcoming this August. Thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you'll tune in to our next event. Thanks.